Today on the Crit House, we're joined by photographer Faith Ninivaggi. Faith spent over 20 years as a photojournalist, capturing everything from breaking news and sports to feature stories and political figures. Now she works as a freelance photographer and educator, running her own commercial photography business where she specializes in portraits, editorial work, and corporate commissions. Faith's photography is influenced by her dual perspectives as a mother and a photojournalist, bringing a blend of intimacy and storytelling to her work. Today on the Crit House, Faith Ninivaggi talks about her myFIVE images from Harry Callahan, Richard Abdon, Dorothea Lange, Arthur Pollock, and Judy Dater. Faith Ninivaggi, thank you so much for joining us on the Crit House. It's nice to have you here. I've known about you and your photography a bit, followed you on Instagram, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself. You have a history in journalism. You're now working as a professor, but you also have another career doing commercial work. But tell us, I mean, when people ask you who you are as a photographer, what do you tell them?
Oh. That's a big question. First of all, thanks for asking me to come on.
Sure.
I've been a fan of your work and looking at your work on Instagram as well for a while now.
Oh, thanks.
So who am I? My God, for so long I was defined by working at the Boston Herald, right? So I went from art school at the Art Institute of Boston when it was in Kenmore Square. Less than a year later, straight to the Boston Herald.
Wow.
I started there as a photo tech and kind of worked my way through to be a photographer. So I was at the Herald for 18, 19 years and starting out when I was in my early 20s. So it defined a very large part of my life and career. But, for the past 25 years, I've been making a living as a photographer. I guess I'm an artist, but I don't share that work as much as my work. I always joke I need to get a hobby because photography is my passion, but I also make a living doing it. And this is the first year most of my kids are back in college, and I kind of get to really get further into my practice, although my freelancing is taking up most of my time. Does that answer the question?
It does, but I have a question. So when you say you're an artist, like what does that work like?
I guess my real passion project has been documenting my family over the course of the past 20 years. But the work there's so much of it, and it's so personal that I've tried to kind of get it out there little bits at a time, and I just haven't really been able to get through it yet. So I'm documenting everyday news, right? And within that genre, I'm running to a lot of tragic events.
Yes.
But at the same time, I'm raising my two little girls and then eventually a blended family. So sometimes making the work about my family was almost an escape, right? From what I was seeing.
The terrible things you were seeing in your daily work.
Yeah. So that played a part in it, right? It was meditative and it kind of saved me, right? Plus, I just wanted to hold on to that time in life where I knew it moved so fast and it was, it's just such a unique time. I got divorced when they were very young, and I felt the need to still document their childhood and their life for them to see it how I saw it, right?
All right, so you had to choose 5 images, which most people tell me is actually can be an excruciating process. Was it for you? Because it's easier for some people because those images come to them. Was it hard, easy, and what did you think about when you were deciding on those 5 images?
Of course, it was a little bit excruciating, but I tried to simplify it. Immediately, what came to mind were all the images that I looked at when I was in undergrad, right? But I didn't want to go that far back because so much has changed since then.
Yes.
So with my choosing, I started to think about where I'm at in life right now. So I chose images that spoke to me as a mother and a photographer and a woman that influenced my style and my values. So I think that's where I landed on the five that I chose. And I took a feminist approach, I think, to a lot of the images I chose. I also wanted them to all go together, but it wasn't that hard, you know? I mean, I left a lot of greats out and a lot of great photographers that influenced me, but I think the images I chose work well together and speak a little bit about who I am and what's influenced me and how I think as a photographer.
Well, let's take a look at the images from Faith Ninivaggi. So your first image is from Richard Abdon, and this just brilliant image with Dovima. Tell us why this is here.
Well, I also chose images that really hold my attention as a viewer that I could look at forever. And this is one of them. I love the gesture of her arms and her body, the sash, the trunk, but then the chains on the elephant's legs and that decisive moment that Abdon made this picture with their legs both up. To me, as beautiful as this image is, there is also a lot of tragedy in it. You know, these are shackled elephants.
Yeah.
There is a juxtaposition between age, right, with the young, beautiful model and the way it's lit, and then the elephants and their older, wrinkled skin. I mean, but they're also the largest animal on the planet, right? And they are just so beautiful. And they also are led by a matriarchy, which is also what I love about this photograph, right? We're bringing it back to women again. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if these elephants are male or female, but I like that fact about the elephants. I think that line between the elephant's eye and the other elephant's trunk and the arms, like your eye can just keep going back and forth and back and forth. It's so poetic. But then again, like I can't stop and look away from the shackled
Yes.
legs of these poor elephants. And a lot of times I've had to find beauty in tragedy, you know? And I think there's a slice of that in this image for me. But then, you know, Abdon is just a brilliant portrait photographer.
Your second image comes from Judy Dater, and before we talk about the image itself, I want to make sure that we recognize because of the community standards of YouTube and Instagram, where we'll be sharing these images as well, we've had to blur out the naughty bits.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that we've had to do that, and we apologize to the audience. But despite that, can you talk, Faith, a little bit about this image and how it affected you?
I think the first time I ever saw this image, I'm speaking about images that speak to me. So it kind of breaks the norm of the male photographer looking at the nude woman. This is Judy Dater photographing Twinka and Imogene Cunningham, who again, you know, this is Imogene 2 years before she passed away. So this is at the end of her life and her career, and she's still photographing. And I see it as a triple portrait, you know, as a woman, I'm looking at a younger woman and an older woman, and I can see myself in all three places. So I'm really drawn to that. I mean, Imogene was it's hard to say one of the first female American photographers, because I guess at this point she would have been 161 years old and photography is 200 years old, right? But she was really a leading woman in that F64 club and pictorialism, and she gave back to the younger generation of women. She was a mentor. This was taken during an Ansel Adams workshop, and Judy Dater was a professor, and Imogene was the visiting lecturer or artist. And they kind of pulled away from the pack of students and ended up making this picture, which I think partly defined Dater's career.
And one of the all-time greats, Harry Callahan and Eleanor.
Yeah. I left this one in because this one I've thought about for, 25 years from the first time I ever saw it. This one I definitely discovered when I was learning about photographers when I was at the Art Institute. And what immediately struck me about Harry's work and this image was at the time when he made this image of Eleanor, he had already been photographing her for 15 years, right? So I thought, wow, the dedication, and it dawned on me that photography could be a love language and is a love language for the two of them. And there was just so much love and respect. Another one I should have that I really love too is Harry, Eleanor with Barbara, and they're both laying on the bed in
Yes.
that beautiful light. That
Yeah.
that is another beautiful photo. But this one reminds me of my time when I was in undergrad and discovering photographers and discovering who I was. And then I went on to photograph my daughters for 20 years. So I can't say Harry wasn't a huge influence, and this image and wasn't a huge influence of what photography is to me.
The whole all of the work that he did with Eleanor has always struck me as just so tender and loving. From he was one of the first photographers that I came across who made me realize that photography can be more than just like a National Geographic image. Not to diminish National Geographic images,
Right.
to be artistic in some way.
Right. And encapsulate time and love and relationship and connection. And if you read interviews about Eleanor, she said she never said no to him, right? Um, and they really nurtured each other's success. And I think probably in large part because of their collaboration with each other, he was able to be as great as he was, right? I mean, he also
Yeah.
was experimenting with film, and she was his sitter with that too, that went beyond just making beautiful portraits. He was pushing the medium.
Yeah, I mean, you're more studied in the history of art, I think, than I am. Almost everybody is, but one of the things that I have begun to realize with a lot of the photographers that people talk about in this program is how important it is to have a collaborator and a supporter and somebody who is there for you, and helping you take your work up. And Alex and Norris Webb are a good example of that. Harry and Eleanor is another good example. But yeah, I mean that piece where you're together, I think, is so important.
That's a good segue into the next photo.
Well, and let's look at that. Arthur Pollock.
Yeah, speaking of togetherness, right? I went straight from undergrad to a major newspaper where I found a community, a department, a photo department of peers, and that I got to learn from and grow with, and really marked like the best time in my life. And so here's a photo that Arthur Pollock, my editor, made. What year was this? 80. Hold on, I wrote it down. It was 88 in Agawam in Riverside Park. So Arthur was a photojournalist, news photographer, and then by the time I met him, he was on the photo desk at the Boston Herald. I was what you would call a weekend warrior, where I worked the weekends. Arthur was on the desk on Saturdays. He always made sure there were bagels, and by the afternoon, there were boxes of pizzas coming in. And getting back to the conversation in the beginning, news is not always easy to cover. You see a lot of tragedy. I like to think back and look at it fondly, and Arthur was just so passionate about the job, and all those assignments he sent me on ends up shaping who you are, right? Because
Yeah.
a lot of those assignments you carry with you. So he was just such an important figure, I think, in my life and as a photographer. And I like to think Arthur, he obviously got on the roller coaster and was photographing this with film. It's just such a joyous, fun photo. And it's different from your typical pack of news photographer shooting the same thing. It's a really fun feature with a lot of energy.
Yeah. So is his influence on you as an well, or both, as an editor, somebody who was like took you under his wing, or like what did you learn from his photography itself? Not only this image, but the other images that he.
It's funny because I never saw his photography until towards the end of his life when he and his son had edited a book, and
Hmm.
he came into the department one day with it. And that was the first time I had seen it. And that was, after 16, 17 years that I'd known him. But, he'd give you an assignment and he'd give you advice on what to do and how to shoot it. And you'd either take that advice or you wouldn't listen to it. It just depended on who you were, what he was saying, what you had to do, or what the situation you were about to walk into was.
What,
But I
it-
think really it was just his like his zest for life and
yeah.
his passion for the newsroom. And, you know, we all know that if we were lucky enough to have that job, it just felt like the greatest job on earth.
Your final image is from Dorothea Lange.
Yes.
Tell us about this one, Faith.
I know it's so iconic, and I hope it's not an obvious choice, but how could you not pick Dorothea? What I like most about this image, besides all its beauty, was part of the reason I got into journalism. And when I do get a chance to shoot journalism, is because journalism has the power to hopefully make a difference. And this photo is an example of that, right? After Dorothea made this photo, it was published in the San Francisco newspaper, and money was sent to this camp for people to then be able to eat. Um, the other thing I really love about this photo and the way Dorothea worked was she was just, and a lot of us are, we're just so, what is the word? We're just incensed
And
on getting the photo, right? On telling the story. And we want that perfect photo to be able to tell that story. And if we know when we've gotten it, right? And if we haven't gotten it, we don't give up. So in this instance, Dorothea was driving by and just had this intuition to stop. And
yeah,
this is when she came across, um, what is her name again? Oh my gosh, you're going to have to edit this. Florence Thomas.
right. Yes.
So she walks up to Florence Thomas and she makes a couple frames. She exchanges some words, but she leaves without not even knowing her name, because I think it was such an intuitive moment. And that speaks to the power of, you know, nonverbal communication in photography. The other thing about this image is I think for journalists and documentary photographers, I think it's a really good reminder that what we do with our photographs and how we're making our photographs and how we're approaching our subjects, you have to be respectful. You have to work with sensitivity, because it affects their lives. You know, I mean, I think there was an interview, and Florence was embarrassed by this photo because it showed that she was struggling, right?
Yeah.
But her
Right.
children were proud because they saw it differently, that she was strong and she got through this adverse time.
I have a comment that I'll probably edit out, and it may seem
Mhm.
strange to you, and I'm sorry if this is probably uh there is a there is a similarity between you and her.
Ha, there is. And you know what? I think it's funny that you say that. And in all honesty, I can also, in my own life experiences, relate to this woman's struggles, right? I mean, I was a single mother with two very young kids, and at first it was very hard for me to get by financially.
Yeah.
So I think I'm also drawn to this image because in my own experience, can relate to what it's like to be a woman with kids and having the weight of the world on you. And that's okay if you leave some of that comment in. I mean, that is part of the reason why I think I am drawn to this image. Like, and what I said in the beginning, I've chosen images that speak to me as a woman, as a photographer, and a mother. So it's very layered.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, that's a great spot to wrap it up. Faith Ninnivaggi,
yes,
did I pronounce it right again?
you did. You got it right. Thank you.
Always
Yeah.
worried about that. Thank you so much for joining us. What a great conversation and some great images to talk about.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.